Well, we always hear the excuse that we didn't get to church because we were fishing, Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. Jesus started that, And he was preaching one day and he told everybody to go fishing. And you may not believe that, but it's here, right here in the Word as we go into Luke chapter 5. And may as well just jump right in here. We're at Luke chapter 5, starting at the first verse, if you got your Bible open there. And it says that one day as Jesus was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, the people who were crowding around him and listening to the word of God. And he was just teaching. He was teaching and preaching right there on the shore. By the way, that's the Sea of Galilee, the lake of Gennesaret. We call it the Sea of Galilee. Most of the time you consider a sea to be saltwater. The Sea of Galilee is a freshwater lake, a very large freshwater lake. And they were just standing around, and Jesus was teaching, and they were listening to him. And all of a sudden, people started crowding around. And, you got to be careful when you're preaching like this and people start crowding around. It says he saw at the water's edge 2 boats left there by the fishermen who were washing their nets. He got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, and asked him to put out a little from the shore. And so he got in the boat and kind of got back from the crowd. It's hard to teach in a crowd when you're in the middle of the crowd. You kind of got to get back away from them. And I know that from experience when we went on our mission trip to Ecuador. And we had one guy, his job was sort of security to make sure the crowd didn't close in around us. Not that was particularly a danger. You couldn't hear behind me. And so when we were teaching, we kept backing up so that people couldn't get around. And they wanted to be around. They wanted to hear what I was saying, but they also wanted some stuff I had. and so it was calling the people together, and that they were gathered around, and Jesus said, I need to step back here just a little bit. Got in a boat and says, would you push this back a little bit so I can get to everybody out there? Because it was a big crowd, really jumping up there, and they were really crowding around. And Jesus was apparently a pretty good preacher. I don't know, because everybody wanted to come and listen. And so he said this was a boat belonging to Simon. Now I want you to look at how Jesus begins to use things right up in front. He does a lot of prearranging of things. There were boats there. There were fishermen there. And Jesus is beginning his earthly ministry, and he's starting to gather his disciples. The apostles he was gathering together for a very special group that he was going to travel with, and he knew what he wanted. So I think, it's my opinion, Jesus went down here by the shore where the fishermen were to start preaching, because he knew he was going to catch disciples. He was going to be touching the lives of these people who were there doing their job. They were just plain old fishermen. They would go out, take this big boat. These boats that they had were not small boats. You think of like a bass boat or something that we would use today. These boats could have been up to 30 feet long. And so they were pretty big boats. And they were fairly wide. And these guys were good at catching fish. They did this for a living. And so they'd gone out and they had been fishing at night. That's a good time to fish because the fish come up toward the surface, and you don't have to go get them quite so deep. They'll come up near the surface, and they would get these nets, and they would surround a school of fish, and they would pull them together and then pull them up into the boat. Well, they had gone out and hadn't really done a lot, hadn't had some good fishing. They fish about like I do, because I never catch anything. I don't know. I can't seem to. I have this weird thing where my idea of fishing includes catching fish. And I never catch any. I'm not any good at it at all. And so, but here he is. He's gathered around these boats, and Peter and his friends, Simon. You notice his name here is Simon. His name isn't Peter yet. And so it says he got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon. And he knows that he's going to be the one that's going to be the most important. He knows he's the one that, Jesus knows he's the one he's going to give the keys to the kingdom to. He says, you're going to be in charge. You're going to be I can tell by your personality, you're going to be a leader. And so you're going to be the leader of this group after I'm gone. And so said he got into one of the boats belonging to Simon and asked him to put out a little from shore. Give him a little bit of stage room there. So people weren't going to walk into the water to come up to hear him. And they just kind of got out there so he could see the whole crowd like this. So it said, then he sat down and taught the people from the boat. And I don't know about you all, but I'd been like him because I'm not much for standing in boats. Boats are not a good platform to stand in. They kind of rock and roll a little bit, but he sat down and began to teach them from the boat. And everybody's listening. And I'm sure it was just deadly quiet, except for the sound of the sea there and other boats around and things like that. But everybody that's there is listening to what he's got to say. When he'd finished speaking, he said to Simon, put out into deep water and let down the nets for a catch. Simon answered, Master, we've worked hard all night and haven't caught anything. But because you say so, I'll let down the nets. Now, apparently, they were impressed with Jesus speaking because he apparently was speaking with authority. They knew he wasn't a fisherman. He's a carpenter. And here's a carpenter telling fishermen to go catch fish when they didn't catch any all night. The ideal time to catch them. Nighttime was the best time, or very, very early in the morning. And so they had been out, hadn't caught anything. They were washing their nets. And Jesus kind of finished the sermon, and he says, press on out here into the deeper water. We're going to go fishing. And Simon, he's going, this didn't work for us, but because you're who you are, and because of the authority of your speech, while you're speaking to all these people, I'm going to go ahead and do it. I'm going to go ahead and give this a try. Now, we probably ought to consider this, okay? When it comes to actually witnessing and teaching people and telling the Word of God, just because we didn't catch any last night doesn't mean we're not going to catch any tonight. Okay, so it's like, okay, the conditions are different now, I know. But I'm here, and I'm telling you to go out into the deeper water. It was the daytime. The sun was up. The fish are going to go to the deep water. They want to be cool. They want to go down where the water's cooler, and they would have to cast the nets down and go way down into the water. Now, I don't know how deep this water was, but this wasn't like up close to the shore where they're all wading around in the water bringing the nets in. They tossed the nets out, and then they would circle the big schools of fish and haul it in. So he says, I don't know. He says, I'm a fisherman and you're a carpenter, and we didn't catch anything all night. And Jesus, we've been doing this a while, but because you're who you are, I'm going to go ahead and do it. I'm going to just see how you do this. Because he was there ready to help them to do this. Now, why would he have him do this? Why did he want to demonstrate to him about fishing? He said when they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. Now, that's a lot of fish, okay? I mean, I can't imagine that. Just so many fish that you couldn't hardly pull them into the boat. The nets began to break. They were used to catching probably some small fish and some big fish, but to have so many that you were tearing the nets just to try and pull it up into the boat, that's a lot of fish. Now, it says here, their nets began to break, and it says they signaled their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and filled both boats so full that they began to sink. Okay, now I've been fishing, and I've never been that successful, okay, ever. But I'm usually trying to do it under my own power. Jesus comes and gives us an extra edge. Whatever we're doing, whether it's fishing for fish or fishing for men, or whatever we're doing, he's going to come and he's going to empower us. He's going to help us to do the things that he calls us to do. What did he tell them to do? He said, go fishing. And they go, well, it didn't work. What would have happened if they hadn't followed what he said? They wouldn't have caught anything. To not fish is to not catch any. That's pretty much the way it goes. But he says, I want you to fish, and I want you to get a lot of fish. Now, why do you suppose he did that? Why do you suppose he gave them so much success as fishermen when he was about to take them away from that job? How about the fact that they were about to leave their vocation by which they fed their families, by which they were successful businessmen, made money, and he was going to take them away from all that. He's helping set their families up to survive, at least with this catch of fish. This was a phenomenal catch. To have so many that your boat's beginning to sink. Only reason my boat began to sink is because I'm not a very good boatman. Forget to put the plug in the bottom or something, you know. But that's why. I think that's why, one of the reasons he might have done it. Second is so that he could demonstrate that when he told them to do something and they did it in his power, they would be successful. Even if they'd never been successful before. Even if they'd never done that before. Jesus could have taken anybody walking along the shore, gave them that boat at the wrong time of day, and say, go fishing, and you catch more than you can carry. That's what happens when we do what Jesus says to do. That's a demonstration of his power. And it began to give them confidence. Because we see immediately here just what Peter says. When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, go away from me, Lord. I'm a sinful man. You know, when you're standing out there and Jesus begins to show you how powerful he is and how the things he can accomplish, all of a sudden you realize how insignificant you really are. How sinful you are. To put your sinful self up next to this Jesus who's doing miracles all of a sudden, and he says, I'm sinful. Go away from me, Lord. I'm a sinful man. For he and all his companions were astonished at the catch of fish they had taken. And so were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, Simon's partners. This was the Simon and James and John fishing company. And they were all working together. They worked in teams. They had 2 boats, obviously, and they're all going, oh man, we're not beans. We're insignificant. And he says, Lord, I can't even be in your presence. Just go away because I'm not qualified to be in your presence. And we need to have that attitude. To know that Jesus is going to care for us, to know that Jesus is going to provide for us, that he's going to lead us into the things he wants us to do and make us successful at the things we're going to do. And I'm not even any good at fishing, and I do it for a living. And all of a sudden I caught this from when a carpenter told me to go fishing. Pretty unlikely, don't you think? And so they said, here, what are we going to do? Jesus said to Simon, don't be afraid. From now on, you will fish for men. And you're going to be this successful. You are qualified. I am qualifying you to do this job that I'm sending you out to do. You're not going to go get these dirty nets and these stinky fish anymore. You're going to leave this. And don't be afraid, he says. You know that? He says, don't be afraid. And sometimes it's frightening when we get a big major change in our life. When he gives us a new direction to go, he's done that to a lot of people here during COVID. And we're afraid. He's making us do things differently. He's making us do different things. And he says, don't be afraid. Because I'm in this, and you're not going to do this fishing for fish anymore. You are going to go fish for men. And they knew that they had been attracted to Jesus. They knew that they loved Jesus' words as he was preaching there on the seashore, as he was in their boat. They were just enthralled with it. And it said back there on the other one that they were astonished. Another translation says they were amazed. You know, I think we amaze too easily these days. I hear people say it on TV all the time. Well, that's amazing. I'm going, you don't get out much, do you? That's not that amazing to me. There's some insignificant thing, and they go, oh, that's just wonderful. That's amazing. No, that wasn't amazing. That was pretty good. But it wasn't amazing. They were amazed. They were amazed at catching these fish and at the power of Jesus' words in leading them to do that. And that what happened to them when they were obedient to his call. He told them to do something. They did it, and they were successful. He says, but your job description's about to change. So they pulled their boats up on the shore, left everything, and followed him. Are we ready to do that? It's like the sermon this morning. Pastor John said, we don't want to have a cheap gospel. We need to tell people it's easy to be saved, but it's going to be expensive. It's going to cost you something. And in their case, it cost them their living. They don't get to fish anymore. They go follow Jesus. And they didn't know where he was going. They pulled the boats up on the shore so they wouldn't float away, and they just left everything and followed him. That's not very good security of your property, because they were surrounded by a bunch of other fishermen who probably would have stole their stuff. There they are, surrendering to Jesus. That was our invitation today. I surrender all. That's what they did. They surrendered everything, from just listening to Jesus preach and doing what he said and catching more fish than they'd ever caught before. We need to do that. We need to understand that God will give us that victory. While Jesus was in one of the towns, a man came along who was covered with leprosy. Now, you got to understand what leprosy meant to somebody back then, because it completely changed your life when you had leprosy, because you couldn't go around anybody else. You couldn't be around your family. You had to go out to some leper colony where nobody but lepers were, because they didn't understand leprosy. It was a very contagious disease. It was a skin disease that made your skin shrivel up and fall off, and it would literally make your nose, your ears fall off. And it was a terrible disease, and their life was pretty much over. They were alive. They weren't physically dead yet, but they couldn't have any contact with anybody. I feel like that now. I feel like I got leprosy right now. Yeah, COVID is like today's leprosy. Unclean, unclean. And that's what they had to do. They had to tell everybody they were unclean. Don't get near me. I'm unclean. It's like he had to go say, I got COVID. Don't come near me. I got COVID. So he gets to Jesus here. Jesus was in one of the towns. A man came along who was covered with leprosy. You notice it doesn't say he just had a little bit on his arm or on his hand. He was covered with leprosy. This was a very, very bad case. And so he came to Jesus as a last resort. That's all there was left. He said to Jesus, when he saw Jesus, he fell with his face to the ground and begged him, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. Now there's faith in advance for you right there. Jesus had been healing people, and people believed that he could heal them. And he's here, and he's coming to Jesus, and he's going, I see somebody that has the power and has what I need. And I'm going to go to him and beg for what he has. We don't even have to beg Jesus for it. We just go to him. We just go to him and say, I'm a sinner. Lord, clean that up. And just like that, he'll forgive all our sin and prepare us to spend eternity with him. But here he is, terrible disease. He says, if you are willing, you can make me clean. He knew it was up to Jesus. Wasn't up to him. He went to Jesus, but Jesus had to do it if he was willing. Now, we put that in our prayers a lot. Lord, if it be your will, we pray that you would raise Aunt Minnie from the dead. That's probably not going to happen. That's not in God's will. That's not in his character. But it says, if you're willing, you can make me clean. Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. That is unheard of. Nobody touched a leper. Lepers were absolutely untouchable. You could not touch them. You might get it. You would end up like them. Stay back. Wear your mask. Use your hand sanitizer. All that kind of stuff. But he says, he touched the man and he said, I am willing. Be clean. That's it. He didn't have any big surgical procedure. He didn't have some big ceremony, some big thing that he did where he jumped around and jumped up and down and ran in circles and fell on the ground. He just said, I'm willing. Be clean. That's all the effort it takes Jesus to do anything. Just, he says it and it's done. You ask Jesus to come into your life, he'll say, okay, it's done. You're forgiven. Just like that. And then you go follow him. And immediately the leprosy left him. I love those words. It doesn't say, and immediately he started to feel a little bit better. And one of the sores on his hand started to heal up. No, he said, and he just sort of, well, I think I'm getting better. I think I'm, no, immediately the leprosy left him. It's done. Jesus can do that. It's the way he works. And here he is. He's astonished now, okay? That would be amazing, okay? I will let you use the word amaze for that. I would be amazed at that. Then Jesus ordered him, don't tell anybody, but go show yourself to the priest and offer the sacrifices that Moses commanded for your cleansing as a testimony to them. In that day, the priests were the doctors of the day. Only they could determine whether or not you were well. Only way you could go back to be in society if you were a leper is to go to the priests and have them examine you. Nobody else was qualified to do it. Nobody else was authorized to do it. But he said, don't go telling anybody. You go immediately to the priests. He says, I don't want you to waste any time because this has to be proven to everybody around. And I have given the priests the authority to declare you healed. And there's a certain offering that you're supposed to bring. Certain sacrifice you need to bring for that healing. And he went and he took the sacrifice. He's supposed to go and take the sacrifice to the people. That's it for a testimony to them. We're going to show everybody what just happened to you. And we're going to use the existing authorities and qualified people to say you are well. I declared you're well. I know you're well. But this is going to be a testimony to everybody else that you are well. This isn't just some kind of report that you just had a little hangnail and you got better. No. You were a leper. You're healed. And now you can go back to your family. Yet the news about him spread all the more so that crowds of people came to hear him and to be healed of their sicknesses. When he started healing people, everybody else started hanging around. Jesus did a neat little thing they liked. They liked watching him heal people. They liked being healed. And the word got out. You know, you can't keep anything a secret anymore. Unless you're the CIA. But then it's not even guaranteed anymore. But he said, don't tell anybody. But it got out. Word got out. And crowds of people came to him because they liked what he was doing. They weren't necessarily interested in his salvation. They were interested in the stuff he was doing. Now, he can do that. I've done that. When we were in Ecuador, one of the things I used is I had the fishing vest on. I went to Walmart, bought a fishing vest, sewed some Christian patches on it here and there, and I filled the pockets with these little pencil balloons and little handheld magic tricks. And I would start blowing up balloons, making them into little dogs, making them into little things, you know, handing them out to people. And you'd hand it to this people, and there'd be two more people coming this way. And then you give that to them, and they say, can I have one for my granddaughter? Yeah, right. Okay, here's one. And we would hand them out. We would have those scripture bracelets, you know, the power bracelets with the different colored beads on them to explain the plan of salvation. We were little leather bands with the beads, and we would put them on their hand, pull it tight, and they could have that. And, oh, look at that. Can I have one for you? And we would be doing that. And the people would gather around like crazy. And then I would take about the next 5 minutes and preach. She said I'd been doing it for 45 minutes, but they said, no, you got to quit. We got to move on because you've been preaching for 45 minutes. No, that can't possibly be. But the people were there. It drew the people. And that was just, we would go to a park. We would go to the square in town, downtown Quito, and just start doing that, and they'd gather around. When we went to the town where these people lived, that we were visiting down there, a little old rubber plantation town called Binces, and we were in the back of a pickup truck. And it was an old beat-up pickup truck. Everything's beat up down there. And we would sit in the back of the pickup truck driving into town, and I'm blowing up animal balloons and handing them to people, because you drive slow through those towns because they got holes in the street that can swallow a Volkswagen, and you're driving around these holes and handing these things out, and people, they look like the Pied Piper, just follow you wherever you went. Jesus used that to gather people, to tell the message. We can do that. I am not ashamed of using little magic tricks and little illusions and balloons. I'll do that. If it'll get people there to listen to the gospel, I am on it. I don't care. You can tell me it's wrong to use magic. It's not magic. It's just something to fool your eyes. That's all it is. But if it brings people to the point where they're willing to listen to the message of salvation, I'm with it. So, but Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. You know, you have to do that when you do this kind of stuff. It's very draining to do this. It's draining to go and preach to people like out in the open like that. It's draining to do it here in church. And you're worn out after a day of preaching. I can tell you that. And so Jesus, after having thousands of people gathering around him, he had to withdraw to lonely places in order to refresh himself. He prayed, spent time with his Father. He was refreshed. He was refilled. He was refueled so that he could go out and do it some more. It didn't say he went out there and stayed, but he would go out there. Often he would withdraw. But that means, to withdraw means you're going to come back. He came back. And he continued to come back, and he continued to use these apostles in his ministry. So it's the examples here, and seeing Jesus work in all of this, showing how he's faithful when he calls us to do something, that he's going to do it. He's going to help us do what he calls us to do. And it's going to take some changes. It's going to take some changes in our life. It's going to take some changes in our mind. It's going to take some changes in our heart. And it's going to take some changes in our communities and all of society. And it's going to be hard. But he'll be there for us. He'll help us do all of it. He'll empower us to do every bit of it. And I claim that every time I get up to do this. So it's a wonderful account here of Jesus' life and ministry. Anybody have any comments or questions? This is just a good one to talk about. And to watch Jesus work. And when he starts to work in you, oh, it's thrilling. It's a thrill. All right. Well, let's close up. One of the Terry Burns. Why don't you close us with a word of prayer?